Chris, thanks for being an influencer. Where were you born and raised?
So I grew up in New York, in the States. Long Island is where I grew up. Not really a bike place so much, but eventually moved to Brooklyn, where I have my shop now, and then lived in California for a little while. But and now I'm back on the East Coast. Actually, split my time between Philadelphia and New York.
Okay, what was your first experience of cycling?
Probably on a BMX bike. Pretty early days, I ended up getting a GT Performer, and I just really enjoyed the freedom that it brought me, just riding around the neighborhood. At that time, I really would go pretty far adventures on the bike, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you started really young in the bike industry. You bought 55 bikes from a police auction when you were 18 years old. How did all that work out for you?
I guess I always had a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit, and pretty early on, I always had an interest in bikes. And one day I came across these bikes in a police auction, and I bought 55 of them, loaded up a massive truck, and I was selling some of them, but I ended up not long after I was in the military and got called up, went overseas, but I didn't end up selling all of them. But my first attempt wasn't as successful, I guess, as my business these days.
Yeah, so let's talk about, you mentioned the military. So you served in the Iraq War, and what were some of the things that you saw and the experiences that might have affected you from that experience?
Yeah, so joining the military, I wouldn't necessarily call myself like a true patriot. I didn't have anything against America or anything like that. I'm born and raised there, and I, support my country. But I'm not sure if I joined to so much fight for the country as, to really just do something that I felt was good, give me some discipline and structure, and really help pay for school. I really didn't come up with much, and I think, the military was offering that, so I gave it a shot. I joined the Army Reserves, and I was driving trucks in the Army, specifically fuel trucks. At that time, when I joined in 2000, I wasn't anticipating going to war or anything like that. Nothing really happened in the past 10 years. So, but sure enough, a year later, 9/11 happened, and then a year later, I was in Kuwait in 2002, and shortly thereafter, from the start of the Iraq War, I was driving fuel trucks in Iraq, supporting the infantry, etc. And that was quite an experience. Definitely one of the most impactful events of my life, I would say. It really made me think a lot about the choices that I make on a daily basis, and how, our dependence on oil, specifically foreign oil in this instance. This dependence seemed to really start a lot of these conflicts, or so I was seeing. And I was not too comfortable with that idea, returning back. And that really... These days, this is really a big motivating factor for what I do on a daily basis. Yeah.
Okay. So do you think there's a disconnect between the cause and effect? For example, Western Europe right now, Russia is at war with Ukraine, but Western Europe is actually funding Russia to fight Ukraine by paying a fortune for their oil and gas. So do you think there's a disconnect?
I think we could learn a lot from the Netherlands. In the 70s, the fuel crisis, et cetera, was a really big deal. And I think they made some drastic changes during that time. And part of that change was actually switching the focus to more on the bicycle as opposed to the automobile, which had more dependency on resources. And just if you think about it, resources in general, it's not just fuel. If we could think about, the choices we make on a daily basis, like, how many resources are we using just to do what we need to do? And even thinking about that, like car ownership, what does it cost to actually own a car just outside of just the fuel costs? And, how does that create certain demands on our lives that we need to make certain decisions and work in a certain way? Where if we, ride a bicycle, live more, human scale, there's a lot more possibilities with our lives. And I think in doing so, it it puts us in a less vulnerable place to make decisions that might compromise our values. And I think that's ultimately what's going on throughout the world, is that we're making a lot of decisions that compromise our values, whether it be, purchasing oil from a place that is not really in line with our values, and maybe in some ways supporting activities that are not in line with our values, and, by proxy in some ways. And I'm not sure I get into too much of that stuff these days, because I think in a lot of ways, the way I look at it is, instead of trying to stop the negative, I just try to promote the positive. And I think that's what, in a lot of ways, when I returned back from Iraq, I had felt that I wanted to stop the negative. I was like, hey, I don't like what's going on here. I don't want this to happen anymore. I need to stop this. But then I recognized that that's maybe not the most effective way to do it, because if you don't present an alternative solution, how are we going to do this? So, and that's really where the bicycle came in. And I realized that, hey, there's other places that have done this successfully, and maybe we could do that as well. It's a big challenge, but I welcome it.
So you returned classified as a disabled combat veteran. What did that mean in a practical term? Did you get rehabilitation or a pension, or how were you traveling at that time?
When I returned back, so while I was in Iraq, I injured my back in a truck crash, and it really left me in a rough spot, because I had always been relatively physical and active, and I wasn't able to maintain the same level of activity as I once did, and that was really troubling for me, So when I returned back to the U.S., the military was kind of like, okay, you're free to go now. I said, well, no, I'm not so ready for that. I think I need some help to get myself a little bit closer to where I was before I do so. So I did some rehabilitation in New Jersey at a military base there. I stayed online for a little while longer, and eventually returned back. But I still had a ways to go as far as my real rehabilitation. And really it took some time, and a lot of it, and it wasn't just the physical. There was definitely other things going on in my mind, and trying to deal with things, trying to deal with living in this. You kind of in war, you really have to revert back to sort of an animal state, and then you return back to civilization. And how do you, deal with that? And so. Trying to work through all that stuff, and it really took me a long while to figure that out, and even today, I still have issues with my back and stuff like that, but it's a lot better than it was at that time, for sure.
Yeah. So not long after you got back, you bought your first e-bike.
So I returned back in 2005, and about 6 years later, after not really being too physically active for a while, a friend of mine had an electric bike. And many of my friends were going out and biking. Not so much for sport, more for recreation and just getting out and enjoying each other's company. And I felt kind of intimidated about that prospect. I think there was a lot of things that intimidated me about life those days. But the electric bikes seemed to intrigue me, and I tried my friends out, and I said, wow, this is pretty cool, and maybe that can get me out there with my friends and such. And I started doing some research, and I found that it was rather popular in other places, and I built one for myself. I just kind of fitted actually a police auction bike with the motor on it, and it was kind of just thrown together, but it worked, and it got me out there, and I really enjoyed it. But through that process of researching, I realized that there weren't many other companies doing this. And I also realized that in America, electric bikes were not so popular, but in Germany and throughout Europe, they're really growing in popularity. In China, they're really massive, right? So I say, well, hey, this seems like an interesting business opportunity. And for myself, always being somewhat entrepreneurial, had a lot of experience with retail, had a lot of experience with e-commerce. Not so much experience with bikes, though. I never worked in a bike shop, but I had decided shortly thereafter to start a business selling electric bikes.
You did have a career before that as well, and with some pretty impressive sort of skills that you built up. So can you talk about them and how that might have helped you start a bike business?
I definitely came from a different approach into this space. I mean, as I said, I didn't work in the bike industry at all. I never worked in a bike shop, but I worked in retail. I've worked in retail since before I was probably even legally allowed to work in retail. My dad was a manufacturer's rep. He had a friend that had a retail shop, and he really showed me the ropes. And I really admired a lot of these retailers, and I saw like the way that they interacted with the community and have their own kind of community, and that was something I was interested in. But even more so, something I was even more interested in was the technology side. And one thing I recognized from returning back from Iraq with the injured back, that I wasn't really able to use my physical body in the same way that I once did prior. And as such, I'm gonna need to use my mind more. And now at this time, really the internet and computers was really growing in popularity. And I figured I could make a career using the internet, and I heard a quote a long time ago about that the internet is the democratization of the tools of commerce. And I said, well, as somebody that didn't really have too much financial resources, said, wow, what that means is that I have access to a lot of things, and I could build something with these tools. And so I really got into learning it. And I was working for an e-commerce company, and I really helped them build up their company pretty significantly. And, and so I really helped them build up their company pretty significantly. And through that process, I started experimenting with helping other companies, and I eventually went out on my own. And during that process, I also went to school. So I went to school for computer science. And so here I am, I'm, building websites for other people, helping them market their business online. I'm in school full time. And I have this, and while I was in school, I started this business selling electric bikes. So I have these three big things going on in my life. And when I got out of school, I had to make the decision, do I get a job in the industry? Do I continue doing the website stuff, do the bike thing? And ultimately I decided to go all in the bike thing. And for me, initially, when I got into the bike thing, it wasn't so much about transportation, and it wasn't so much about lessening our dependence on foreign oil. It was really about me just getting out there, enjoying myself, and helping other people to realize that same benefit. But around that time when I was graduating from school, I realized that this is a transportation thing, that this is in a lot of ways the exact opposite of the type of thing that I was this ecosystem that I was participating in the military. And from there, I knew that I could go all in on this thing and really devote, my life to, and that's really what it's been for the past, 10 years.
Well, you really have devoted your life, because you started, I think, with a $20,000 loan, about as small as you could be.
Yeah.
I think you're even upstairs, which is a crazy place for an e-bike shop to be. But I believe in 3 years you went from absolute tiny to $1 million a year. That's a remarkable rate of growth. What do you think the secrets to that success were?
So as you said, I really started without much, but I was driven, and I worked really hard. I mean, I think that's a lot of it. I saw the opportunity and just went for it, and didn't take no for an answer. I mean, that was a big thing. Somebody, you're going to say you're going to start a bike shop on the second floor without an elevator. This is crazy. But I said, this is the way I can do it, and I believe that this is possible, and I want to help other people realize these benefits, and I'm going all in on this. And sure enough, I did that, and eventually more and more people came along for the ride with me, and I got some people to help me out, and had a close friend that helped me in the early days, and then eventually my younger brother started working with me, and just built it up over time. It's been a wild journey, that's for sure.
I believe you actually got a fine of $25,000 from New York City for selling e-bikes, but being such a dangerous person, I guess. Or what was the story behind that? And did you end up could you fight that fine, or what happened in the end?
So one of the most challenging things about starting this business, and I think this happens a lot in these kind of new innovating industries, is that the legislation is not always in line with the technology. And that was certainly the case in New York, where electric bikes in many ways were considered illegal. They were considered unregistered scooters, basically. And this was challenging. And it kind of worked for me because I was able to sell online. I was able to sell outside of our local market. And in a lot of ways, you know, people probably looked at our business model and say, this is not really sustainable. Like, how are you going to continue to do this? Eventually, I moved to New York, where they were even more explicitly illegal. But I found kind of a loophole there, which pedal assist electric bikes were not considered motorized scooters. They weren't explicitly illegal, or at least this is my contention at the time. And this was really, I kind of bet the farm on it because I saw the potential in New York, how great that was. And I said, hey, I'm going to do this anyway. I know it's a risk, but really the only way that we're going to make them legal is to go straight to the source and start introducing them and having conversations. It's not just going to happen out of nowhere. So I opened the shop despite this challenge, and 6 months later, I got a $25,000 fine from the city. And I was baffled. What am I going to do? You know, it was challenging enough just getting this thing going, and having that fine, it was really difficult. So I made a bunch of phone calls. I had learned to be resourceful through the military, and really learned to, you know, connect with people and get the right person, you know, to help me. And so what ended up happening, I called everybody that I could, but what ended up happening, I called the Mayor's Office of Veterans Affairs, and I said, hey, I'm a disabled veteran. I just opened this business and I got a $25,000 fine. They said, well, we don't give fines that great, you know, in New York. I said, well, I have one here, you know, and I got a call 2 days later, and he said, I think there was some issues with the paperwork. It's been taken care of. So this is the New York way sometimes, you know. It's there's a lot of bureaucracy, but if you know how to, you know, move around, you can make things happen. So not long after, they came back and gave me another fine. There was a lot of misunderstandings about the law, and it was my interpretation and their interpretation. And that time I decided to not make any calls, and I went to court and actually beat the case and set a legal precedent that pedal assist bikes were legal. So we in some ways helped to initially legalize electric bikes in New York, outside of a lot of the lobbying efforts and stuff like that we did, which it was pretty wild. And it was still a challenge. I mean, you could just think like somebody coming into the shop and say, well, we have these electric bikes. Just by the way, the law's not so clear on them. And, you know, all these things you have to talk with people about, which is not really so great in the selling experience, you know. But several years later, New York officially, you know, legalized them. And it's really had a lot to do with the push from bike share, you know. And they got, you know, bigger organizations working on this thing. Not always so easy to listen to the little guy, but I was doing it anyway, you know.
Yeah, well done on that.
Thank you.
For taking on City Hall, literally.
You try.
As the expression is in America.
Yeah.
So in one of your videos, you say, I just didn't quit even though I was feeling broken. So what have been some of the biggest struggles for you? Is it the more typical business issues of cash flow and staff, or is it a broader burden of sort of trying to change American society, which is so often pro-car and anti-bike?
People have a lot of different opinions about business, you know, whether it should be just straight business and not be about your passion, or whether it should be passion, or where you should separate those things. And I think that I tend to be on that side, that I just happen to be in a business that I'm really passionate about. And that could be really challenging. You know, my emotions could be really tied to that. I mean, naturally, any business, you have emotional ups and downs, you know, due to finance challenges or whatever the case may be. In times like, you know, COVID, it's even more challenging. But I definitely have taken some blows over the years, I think, you know, in things that I had hopes about. This will happen. You know, for example, the law change. This was a really big thing. Every year, you know, I'm going to Albany, the state capital in New York, and speaking with the governor's office and doing, you know, some lobbying, which I had no experience doing, but this is what needs to be done, and just do it. Giving test rides to politicians and that sort of stuff. But every year I was like, okay, it's going to pass this year. And then you have this thing, it doesn't happen. I said, wow, gosh, I don't know. Can I continue on with this? I don't know. But that's one thing, I just stuck with it despite all that. And eventually what I decided to open another location in California, which was a really crazy idea. But there the law was more favorable towards electric bikes, and in New York it wasn't, and it was really challenging. I said, let me go out there and try it out, and that's been pretty good. I mean, California's got its own challenges, but at least they've been pretty supportive of electric bikes. So I did that, and funny thing is, a month later after I signed a lease out there, New York, they actually fully legalized electric bikes. So I don't know, maybe they said, hey, we're losing Chris, and gotta bring him back in. No,
I'm sure they did. I'm sure that was the reason they changed legislation just then. So, okay, paint a picture of Propel, your Propel business now. Just tell me about how it looks, how many team members you might have, and what you do.
Yeah. So Propel is a very unorthodox business, and really we respond to just the needs of the market, or where I foresee the needs to be, or what really I think is going to have the most impact. I guess you could say we're kind of impact-led business in a lot of ways. And as such, we have kind of an unorthodox team makeup. We participate in some unorthodox activities. For example, I make a lot of videos. I make a lot of YouTube videos, and this is a big part of my day-to-day work. And many people say, well, that's surely not the right job for a CEO of a company. But I don't necessarily believe that. I think that, it's my job to really connect with the community, to inspire people, to educate people, whether it be my customers, other people in the industry, my staff. And I think that videos do a good job of helping to create that sort of experience. We also operate in a strange way, since we started in this business that's not really so focused on the hyper local business. We were thinking more on a national and even global scale in that regard. And so we're spread out across the country. We have a lot of remote staff that work for us. We have over 30 team members now working for the company. And it's a really great honor, all the people that I'm able to employ, and I see that as a new opportunity for me. Not just making these changes by lessening our dependence on oil, but actually also helping to bring meaning to other people's lives and helping other people to improve their lives through these amazing products that exist out there.
So are you actually selling more bikes via mail order beyond your New York and Long Beach shops than you are through your shops? Is that how your business works?
The business is really pretty unorthodox. I mean, a lot of it is online, but not really necessarily in the traditional sense. It's not somebody just going on the website and clicking and purchasing something. I mean, before COVID, we actually had a lot of people that fly into our shops because we had kind of a unique product selection. We're really focused specifically on this commuter and cargo, really car replacement type products. And as such, we're having a lot of interactions with people online, and some of the sales might be completed online, some of them might be completed in store. We also have some vans that we do deliveries in a relatively large radius. So we do a lot of different things. I will say more recently, New York has been pretty explosive in the growth that's going on there, and the visions that I had, 10 years ago about what New York might be like, it's actually starting to come true now. And we're really starting to see a shift in that mode and the support for all stakeholders in that. And that's really exciting, inspiring for me. And I'm just continuing to lean into that.
Now, you call your sales team matchmakers. I don't think I've ever heard of any business in any industry that uses that term. Is that an original Chris Nolte invention, and why do you call them matchmakers?
Yeah. So I can't take all the credit for making up the term matchmaking. It's actually a close friend of mine that worked with the company for a short time before he went to law school. he actually helped me come up with this term, because this was just based on the type of selling that I was doing. It's educational selling. We don't sell bikes. We help people match to their right bike. And, I think a lot of businesses, they say, okay, this is what we have. Like, let me try to sell this to you. Yeah. And I don't think about it like that. I think about, what are your needs? Let me see if we have something that actually meets your needs. And I think that's more like the matchmaking process. And I think people need to change their minds about that. And really, so many of our business practices are pretty unorthodox, and we don't think that, oh, this is just the way it's done. And think, how should it be done? How would I want it to be done? And if you think about it, in a lot of ways, the internet very much coincides with this type of experience, and the way people shop online that they're not sold to per se. You can kind of poke around, you can educate yourself, and we try to create a similar experience with our sales team, where they're there more to support the customer. They're there more to support and educate the customer through their process of choosing the right bike for them. And then we should try to help them in making an educated decision, really. I think that this is, in a lot of ways, this is the future of retail, though, honestly, or most sales in general. I think most people feel kind of slimy in the traditional sales experience, and nobody actually wants it. But, if you don't have much choice, you'll just deal with it. But if you had a choice, I think you'd prefer to just be educated and be supported,
So looking at the bigger picture in the USA, particularly your home country and your market that you sell in, where are we at now, and what do you think it will take for there to be a tipping point where the products you sell go from, say, more fringe to more mainstream? When you've got, instead of City Hall changing the rules for you, you might have Ford or General Motors knocking on your door for a few ideas.
So there's loads of changes happening in America, and we're seeing it mostly in urban environments where the need for alternative modes of transportation is really critical. We have CO2, we have certain CO2 guidelines that we're trying to lower emissions, that sort of thing, and improve safety by using, modes of transportation that are less likely to hurt or kill somebody. Popular to contrary belief. Some people say, hey, you're going to get run over by a cyclist. I think the big threat here is automobiles. And not that I'm necessarily totally against automobiles, but they have their time and place. And the urban environment is not necessarily that. And I think it's challenging for a lot of people to wrap their heads around what the possibilities are. I think COVID changed that a lot. I mean, even if you think about it, in America, I'm sure it's happening really throughout the world. You have like these streets got shut down. You have restaurants out in the street and different things like that. And you hear people walk around and they say, wow, it's like Europe here. And it's like, yeah, it's not that complicated. We can make these little shifts, and it's pretty amazing. We can actually see a lot of the benefits these other countries have. You don't necessarily have to go all the way there to enjoy your space. That doesn't have to be just about passing through. You can actually just be where you are. And I think that's the big difference. And so the cultural mind shift is really starting to change. I think the internet helps a lot with that, because we need to transfer ideas, and it's not so easy to do that, where many of us are stuck in a bubble. We don't really understand our world much outside of ourselves. But I think we're really starting to see that. I think that the science is starting to really show what makes sense, that, hey, these are real solutions, that this is not just a toy as most people view bicycles in America. It's not just a product for sport. That's a big challenge we have to overcome. And so it's really a lot about rebranding the bicycle. This is a phrase that I've been bringing up lately, and I think that that's something that's important, because if you talk to somebody in many European countries that are using bikes for a form of transportation, if you ask them what is a bicycle a form of transportation, many might say yes. If you ask people in America, if you ask people in the United States, many people would say no. Bike is for recreation, for sport, but getting around, I use my car. So to change that mindset, it's a challenging thing to overcome. But that's But for me, after tackling some of the legal legislation stuff, this is really the challenge, the next frontier. It's about infrastructure. building safer places to bike and building more access and a better network of connectivity, because the reality is people won't do it if they don't feel safe. Yeah, sure, you're going to get some people are going to do it, but if you want to get most people out there, you need to create spaces that are safe for that. And you're seeing the cities that are making those changes, that it's increasing dramatically. And fortunately, as I said, I think on a national level, we are really starting to recognize that. I think we have some smart people in office that are actually can see, hey, this is the real science behind it, and we can do this. And it's going to take a while, but if you have that vision and you stick to it, we can realize some great changes, and people can really benefit from it. And one of the biggest things I see is that it can address so many things outside of just our transportation systems, but also our ability to connect with each other, which I think is probably even more critical than that, right? And I think that a lot of the challenges we deal with today are because we're so divided. We're always focused on, as I said, like where we're going as opposed to just where we're at, and we're not able to connect with people. We're, traveling around in several thousand-pound vehicles where we can't have that connection. But you talk to anybody that rides a bike around or walks around, it's a whole nother experience. And those serendipitous connections, I think that this is what we're made to experience, and why not have a form of transportation that just creates that connection naturally?
Why not indeed? What a good question. So Chris Nolte, thank you for being an influencer.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really been a pleasure to be here.